Now, for those of you who don't know the history of our top 10, all right, about 20 years ago, we started publishing a forecast of 10 issues to watch. Now, for those young people in the audience who don't know who Karnak the Magnificent is, ask somebody that's got gray hair like me, and they'll tell you who that is. But anyway, we built on this idea of sort of 10 to watch and really created our expanded Top 10 Education Issues report, which you have on your chairs. And it's a combination, really, of the issues we think are going to be the most important issues, but also ones that we think should be the most important issues. Now, Lauren is going to start off with issue number 1, but first, we have a video that we're going to show you. We asked some of our favorite North Carolinians what public schools meant to them. Take a look.
Hi, I'm Julie Pittman, and I'm coming to you from the North Carolina Center for the Advancement of Teaching on Ocracoke Island.
My name is Christina Spears, and I serve as a teacher leader in Wake County's Office of Equity Affairs, and I'm a graduate of Ashe County High School.
My name is Marvin Moore, and I'm the principal at Eisenberg Elementary School here in Rowan County, North Carolina.
Hi, my name is Justin Parmenter. I teach at Waddell Language Academy in Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Joe Kwan, cellist for the Avett Brothers.
I'm Venetia Carr with the North Carolina Department of Public Safety.
Hi, my name is Corinne. I'm a third grader at Harrisburg Elementary School.
Hello, I'm Roy Williams, and I attended T.C. Robertson High School in Skyland, North Carolina, right outside of Asheville.
My name is Lisa Godwin, and I am the 2017 Burroughs Welcome North Carolina Teacher of the Year.
The thing that I love the most about RS Central High School, and really about all of Rutherford County schools, is that they are built on a foundation of support, community, and innovation.
Caring adults such as school counselors and teachers are what make our public schools amazing.
And I wouldn't be where I am today without the help and the advantages that I was given because of public education.
What I loved about my public school when I was growing up, and it's also true of the one that I work at now, is that it was a true melting pot.
One of the things that is most memorable to me about going to public school in North Carolina was I had a math teacher in high school, Mr. Welch, who also taught my two elder sisters who knew me before he even met me because of my sisters. And I thought that was a very beautiful thing for him to remember.
As a graduate of Catesville High School, I remember Miss Darren, Miss Davis, Coach Sumter, Miss Higginbotham. All of them were great teachers and left a lifelong impression with me.
What I love about public schools is that I can go to school with all my neighbors and friends.
My favorite teacher when I was growing up was a high school math teacher, Mrs. Rosalie Baldwin. The toughest teacher I've ever had, but also the best. She still has an influence on me today, the way I give my team some feedback about their performance.
Public schools are so important. We are more than just a place where kids gain knowledge of the mind, but we feed their souls and we help them achieve their dreams.
Public education means both obligation and opportunity. North Carolina has an obligation to put a great teacher in every classroom and a great principal in every school. And that creates the opportunity for a kid's success in our school and in life. Together, we can do this. Let's get to work.
So it's hard not to feel inspired after that, right? So like the folks in the video at the forum, we love our public schools. We believe that they're one of our state's greatest achievements, and that's why our #1 issue this year is renew North Carolina's commitment to public schools for the public good. So what do we mean when we say public good? Public education benefits everybody in society, not only those who have kids in public schools. Having strong and equitable public schools leads to greater economic growth, improved public health, and lower levels of inequality. Public schools are one of the only institutions in society that bring people together across different racial, cultural, and socioeconomic groups, which is really more important than ever in our increasingly diverse society. In addition, a key goal of public education since it was founded has been to ensure that all citizens have the knowledge they need to be civically engaged, serve their communities, and preserve our country's democratic values. So given this, it should be a no-brainer, right, that public schools would have our unwavering support, and especially that of our policymakers. But that's not really what's happening. Recent policy decisions have served to discredit, defund, and devalue our state's public education system. And at the same time, we've seen an emphasis on values like competition, choice, and proficiency, while public schools are often blamed for so-called failures. And instead, we should be reversing the policies that have systematically dismantled support for and trust in our public schools, teachers, parents, and students. So let's take a minute and think about what we really want for our children's education and what's best for the public good of our state. Think about what people said in these videos, about what made their public schools so special to them. It's about community, it's about diversity, it's about caring relationships. Our public schools are doing amazing things, and we believe they deserve more support. So here's what we're recommending for our top issue this year. First, strengthen our commitment to traditional public schools, educators, and students. We need to remember and recognize the value of public education as a public common good. Our schools need to be equipped to serve the needs of all of our students. Second, shift the narrative surrounding traditional public schools away from one that stigmatizes them, particularly those serving kids in poverty, as failing, and instead place pressure on our state leaders to reverse policies that have all but ensured that these schools will have a hard time meeting the needs of their students. And third, listen to students, educators, parents, and communities to ensure that all voices are heard when making policy decisions, particularly those who have historically been the most marginalized.
Issue number 2, target rural North Carolina's unique education challenges. This is a brand new elevated issue for us, and actually when you hear the next couple, they're actually ones that we think carry through across all of these issues. Did you know that North Carolina has the second largest rural population in the country? We have 568,000 students from rural North Carolina. We're second only to Texas. And actually number 3 is 200,000 students behind. So we are unique in that way. Now, if you spend all your time in Charlotte or in Raleigh and don't spend so much time in Tarboro, that might surprise you. I was surprised at how big it was and how much of a gap there was. The fact is 87 of our 115 K-12 public school districts are located in rural counties. Now, nowhere has been more affected by structural changes in the economy than rural North Carolina. I grew up in Cumberland County, and pretty much everyone in my family and everyone I knew's family worked in textile mills. And then almost overnight, they were gone. And what happened in my hometown happened all across this country, and particularly here in North Carolina, and now we have large swaths of our state that are in various stages of economic decline, and that has an enormous impact on educational opportunities and outcomes. The most visible ones are the ones that are driven by local resources. I'm going to point out a couple. Urban districts, again, which is a minority of them, have twice the average local teacher supplements available to pay on top of the state salary. That's $4,200 on average versus $2,100 on average for our rural counties. And the other is urban districts spend about 25% on average more per student than rural districts. Where does this show up? 25 of the 30 districts with the highest teacher turnover in North Carolina are rural. And class offerings in poorer rural districts often lack the diversity of those found in wealthier ones. For example, rural districts in North Carolina have less than half the number of high school AP course offerings than urban districts. So what should we do about this? Well, first, address the rural funding challenges. We believe the state's current funding system, including the low wealth and small county supplemental funding programs, are insufficient today. We must take advantage of 2 major opportunities that we're going to talk about more today to address unique rural challenges. Second, we need to focus more on rural teacher recruitment, which may include increasing state support to directly boost pay for teachers serving in rural North Carolina. The state should also support grow your own teacher education programs. There's a wonderful one getting started in Johnston County that targets students who wish to teach in their hometowns. That's one of the beautiful things that we see all across North Carolina still. our principals and teachers that grow up and want to go back home and teach. And then the last one is to address the broadband access gap for students. We have a lot to be proud of in North Carolina about our digital connectivity. We've actually done a great job. It's a nation-leading job on connecting our schools. But there still is gaps when students leave school, particularly in rural North Carolina. Sometimes this is called the homework gap. According to the FCC, 95% of the households in North Carolina that don't have internet access are located in rural parts of our state.
Number 3 is directly address persistent racial inequities in North Carolina schools. So like the rural education issue, this is one of the issues that spans across multiple topics in our top 10, and this is one of the most urgent issues facing our schools today. Our state's more racially diverse than ever now, and at the same time, our schools are becoming increasingly segregated and unequal. One prime example of this is in my home district of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, which at the time when I went there was known as one of the most successfully desegregated districts in the country and is now the most segregated district in the state, and one of the most rapidly resegregating districts in the country, which as someone who really benefited from my time there, it really breaks my heart. We're also facing massive racial inequities within schools, some of which are shown in the chart above, and that's also in your program, in the top 10 publication. In nearly every school in the state, disparities in course enrollment and identification for special education continue to lead to very different educational opportunities for students of different racial backgrounds. And even more alarming are the discipline disparities in our schools, especially for Black students who are consistently punished more often and in harsher ways than white students for the same behaviors. We need to do better, and we need to do it now. So we urge our lawmakers to take action on these next steps. First, invest in ongoing teacher training to foster racial equity. We need funding to support training for school personnel to address racial bias, promote cross-racial and cross-cultural understanding. All educators should be required to attend ongoing and in-depth professional development on race and implement tried and true practices that we already know work, like culturally responsive pedagogy and restorative justice. Second, create effective pathways to promote greater diversity in our teacher pipeline. Research tells us unequivocally that having a racially diverse teaching force is good for all students, and for students of color, having same-race teachers increases likelihood of graduation and reduces discipline disparities. We must invest in effective programs to recruit and retain teachers of color. We include a number of suggestions in the publication, the first of which is to expand the North Carolina Teaching Fellows Program to HBCUs. Number 3, recommit to creating and sustaining integrated schools and classrooms. We know that integrated and inclusive schools help to reduce racial disparities both in academic outcomes as well as in school resources. We should do everything we can at the district and state level to reverse and prevent further resegregation, including limiting the spread of municipal charter schools across the state.
Issue number 4, seize historic opportunity to advance adequacy and equity in school funding. Now, the photo in here is a mobile classroom that's in use here in Wake County, or as you can see, we're calling them cottages now. So that's cool, right? Now, all right, I got a lot of Wake County friends here. Don't get mad at me for this because I'm trying to help you here, all right? This is one of 1,100 being used here in Wake County, the most well-funded school district in the state. It's not enough, but I mean, this is, and I understand from talking to faculty, one of these, at least was without a working bathroom while being used for a special needs class of elementary students, with just one single teacher who had to send the child out, bundle them up to walk over to the main building to go to the bathroom. Now, again, I'm not trying to sing out Wake Counties because I know what the issues are. But the fact is there's more than 5,500 of these in use across the state right now, which is why we have an $8 billion unmet facility need across North Carolina. So please stop talking about canceling bonds. You know, we got a lot of work to do. I mean, I'm sorry, folks, but this ought to make you mad. I mean, it does me. I mean, the General Assembly's task force on education finance reform has an October deadline to propose an overhaul of how our state schools funds. Our friend Craig Horn is here. I'm sure he'll be happy to hear your ideas. He's the one of the chairs. Also, I'm going to call him out to you. Senator Rick Horner's here too. Rick's here. Rick's the new chair of the one of the new. Look at him. He's turning his back on us. See that guy right there, that handsome fellow back there? He wants some ideas too. But there's two big things that are going on, and I got Jeff Coltrane coming next, so don't worry. So you got the task force going, and then you have the Governor's Commission on Access to Sound Basic Education, and they're supposed to wrap up their work, receive recommendations from all these smart folks that were hired to make recommendations, and then those are going to come forward to give us possibly a path to this now 20-plus year-long Leandro case, which I think 20 years is probably long enough. For us to finally address head-on where we are falling short. So, what we recommend first is prepare for the implementation of a Leandro remedial process. Ideally, the recommendations and potential settlement from the Governor's Commission and the proposals from the General Assembly would be blended together, right? I mean, that would be how things could work. So, the Governor, the Department of Public Instruction, the State Board of Education, we got some of them here too, General Assembly need to set aside any partisanship and act on the recommendations swiftly. 2, prioritize adequacy and equity in efforts to reshape school finance. We're not the only group that's urging the key parties to focus on adequacy and equity. In fact, it was a common theme if you've been to any of the meetings of the Commission and the task force. We don't just need a more efficient system to deliver the same inadequate and inequitable resources. And then finally, prepare for and support a bond referendum for 2020 to address infrastructure needs. So kudos to House Speaker Tim Moore and State Superintendent Mark Johnson for joining the forces to push a new statewide bond. I wish it had happened sooner, but we're not complaining if we get those kind of resources for our K-12 schools. So we'd like to see more for K-12 in the first proposal, but we certainly applaud their focus.
Number 5 is recognize that teacher recruitment and retention starts with professional treatment. We got a lot of teachers here. So I chose to use this photo of the little girl playing school, which I'm sure a lot of us like me did when we were younger, because I just recently read an annual poll that's been done since about the 1950s that found this year, for the first time ever, the majority of respondents said that they would not want their kids to become teachers when they grow up. And I found this to be really sad, but it's not really all that surprising, given that teachers have persistently low salaries, limited benefits, and less professional autonomy to do their job. North Carolina is among the bottom in the country, 37 to be exact this year, I believe, on teacher pay. That's down from 19th in 2001 to 2002, and adjusted for inflation, salaries are down 9% since 2009. In addition to low salaries, lawmakers have also recently eliminated career status for teachers. They've cut master's degree salary supplements, longevity pay, and they've cut retiree health benefits for those who begin teaching in 2021 or later. They've also made teachers' jobs harder by cutting funding for textbooks, classroom resources, teaching assistants, and failing to get the statewide school bond on the ballot. So it's really no wonder that the state's going through a crisis when it comes to teacher recruitment and retention. To improve the situation, we have to treat teachers as the professionals that they are. So here are our recommendations. First, improve educator pay and reinstate policies and programs that professionalize teaching. We need ongoing and significant increases in teacher pay. We also need to reinstate master's pay, retirement health benefits, and increase funding for PD to help restore North Carolina's status as a teaching destination. Second, target teacher recruitment and retention efforts to benefit high-needs students. Policymakers should also create incentives to encourage the best teachers to work in hard-to-staff subjects in the schools with the greatest need. The General Assembly should also restore funding to support these struggling schools so that teachers and students in those schools have all that they need. Third, set demanding but reasonable standards for teacher preparation programs. We have to maintain rigorous standards for North Carolina educators, but at the same time, we need to eliminate barriers to entering the profession that don't actually improve teaching and learning. And last, extend limited categories of teacher contracts to 11 months with additional supports. The General Assembly should grant beginning teachers and those in low-performing schools with 11-month contracts with additional pay to allow for PD, mentoring, and increased planning time.
All right, issue number 6. This one's not controversial. Strengthen charter school and private school voucher transparency and accountability. Now, you probably can't read this. I mean, I can barely read it from here myself. But it basically says public schools are failing, therefore we must redirect public funds to voucher programs, siphoning off vital funds, eliminating personnel and resources. That public schools are failing and the cycle continues. In the last decade, North Carolina has seen an explosion of options that fall under the umbrella known as school choice. Happy National School Choice Week, actually. These initiatives have been lifted up by policymakers and others as a means of improving public education, but have they? 20 years after the first charter school opened, there is no evidence that any new best practices are being developed or scaled. Now, some of the very best features of a charter school, like calendar and school day flexibility, are things that our traditional public school districts would like to have too, but are not permitted. National for-profit charter management companies are also now flocking to North Carolina. You know, charter schools, when they started, the concept were these homegrown local groups coming together to fill a missing need in the community. Now, 1/5 of charter schools in North Carolina are operated by for-profit companies, 80% that are headquartered out of state. Now, we've highlighted in previous top 10s the shocking lack of accountability and transparency in our private school voucher program. We are on track right now to spend $1 billion in taxpayer funds on private, almost exclusively religious schools. We have a lot of data points in the publication, so please take a look at it. But looking ahead, we have some thoughts. First, require impact analysis on segregation for new charter school applicants. The data tells us that charter schools are exacerbating the trend of resegregation. Now, we have what is a watered-down charter law that's not really enforceable anyway, that says that charter schools should be representative of the community. There are some charter schools that are trying, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. I know Explorus right here in Raleigh I think got approval to be the first one to start using socioeconomic data. So I'm not trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater. But this, of course, the possibility of municipal charter schools that just looking at the populations they would serve are going to be segregated. I mean, that's just numbers. Second is determine the actual funding and impact of charter schools on traditional public schools. It feels like every year we debate how are charter schools funded enough, or public schools, how are they? Let's figure it out, right? Let's figure out exactly what they're getting, and so that our students aren't being shortchanged wherever they go to school. Implement real accountability and transparency in the Opportunity Scholarship Program. Until lawmakers provide robust financial oversight and a vehicle for the public to understand whether or not voucher students actually do better academically in private settings, we believe there should be a moratorium on increased voucher funding. Repeal and replace the innovative school district and expand Restart School model with state support. I'll be honest with you, I think Eric Hall and the General Assembly may be having second thoughts about this whole forced takeover model too. Schools want and need more support. There's part of the ISD that actually talks about innovation zones where they're actually partners. And so let's at least, if we're going to keep it, let's at least shift the focus away from takeover to true partnerships and remove the threats that we've been dealing with. And then finally, in the virtual charter school pilot, it continues to underperform. The poor results after the first 3 years should have been enough to at least rethink it. But let's make sure that we understand before we keep moving forward and millions more taxpayer dollars are spent and more children fall behind.
Issue number 7 is eliminate stress and stigma in testing and accountability policy. So this has been a hot button issue in education for a while now, and we all know that debates have ramped up just in the past week as Superintendent Mark Johnson has promised to reduce time spent on testing across the state. For years, parents and teachers have argued that high-stakes accountability policies cause stress and anxiety for students and force teachers to narrow the curriculum and teach to the test. These are serious concerns, especially in our technologically advanced society, which is why I chose this cartoon, in which the skills that are most in demand for jobs today are those that are difficult to assess using multiple choice tests like creativity, critical thinking skills, and innovation. But it's also important to point out that standardized tests can be a valuable way to make comparisons across students, classrooms, and schools. And they can particularly be useful to identify inequalities that need to be addressed. But the bottom line is, test scores by no means tell us everything that we need to know about student learning. They're not the only metric that we should be considering when we're evaluating schools and teachers. So here are the key areas that we think Superintendent Johnson and other lawmakers should consider when reforming state testing. Number one is reduce testing anxiety for students and educators by eliminating high-stakes policies, such as tying educator pay to test scores and threatening schools with takeover by the innovative school district. These things can create toxic school environments and often cause more harm than good. Second, eliminate the faulty A to F school grading system. So we've been beating this drum since the very beginning, and unfortunately nothing's changed as of yet, so we still need to keep on going. These grades tell us more about which schools are serving students in poverty than they really do about student learning. Only 16 states in the country still use A to F grades, and North Carolina is the only state that allocates such a high percentage to proficiency rather than growth. In the past, we've argued for revising the formula to put more focus on growth, but at this point, this system has caused so much stigma and stress for schools that we'd rather just eliminate it altogether and replace it with something more equitable. Finally, consider multiple forms of assessment to measure student, teacher, and school success. Test scores, as we know, are just a one-time snapshot, and they're not really all that predictive of long-term student success. So we should consider alternative forms of assessment that a lot of schools are already starting to experiment with, like portfolios, capstone projects, and classroom observations, just to name a few ideas. These can really give us a more holistic picture of student learning.
Issue number 8. Start at the top by investing in school leaders. Our school leaders have an incredibly complex and challenging job. Staffing leading large organizations, juggling expectations from their central office, their local school board, the state school board, the General Assembly, the Department of Public Instruction, and I haven't mentioned parents yet. They're accountable to parents too, right? And we entrust them, our children, to them every day. It's a tough job, but some days that job is even harder. This gentleman on the screen right here, if you don't know who he is, that's John LeGrand. He's the principal of Butler High School, just outside Charlotte. 3 months ago, John held a school and community together after a student was shot and killed by another student. By all accounts, Principal LeGrand has been the glue. He actually spoke at the funeral of the victim, Bobby McKeithen, and said, "I don't have all the answers, but I do know this with certainty. We're going to use this to cause a positive change at Butler High School." That's a leader, and we need more of them. Our principals need to be paid more, yes, and we're going to address that too. But what they tell you is they need more time. Tabari, we'll talk about that on the panel. They need more time, they need more resources, they need more support. The lack of school counselors, where's Beth? The lack of school nurses, school psychologists, those things are all affecting teachers, and they're certainly affecting the leaders of our school. And so you'll see that sprinkled throughout our top 10 recommendations. But of course, pay is also important, right? 2016, our national ranking slipped to 50th. Thankfully, the General Assembly took action, put in place some significant new investments, and a new system of compensation that afforded many principals substantial pay raises. That's good. But there were some issues too. Many veteran principals faced large drops in compensation thanks to the shift in the program away from valuing experience and credentials and tying it more to growth in student test scores, which also makes pay more volatile, and we believe also sets up a potential disincentive to move to low-performing schools. So What do we recommend? First, fix the new principal pay plan. We keep passing hold harmless provisions, so at some point you're not really having a new plan anymore if you just keep keeping hold harmless in place. So maybe let's really fix it this time. A redesigned compensation model should value years of experience and advanced degrees. And let's include performance incentives, but not deterrence, for high-performing principals to take over low-performing schools. This affects everyone. Restore retiree health benefits for future educators and state employees. Right now, if you don't know this, any new state employee hired after 2021 will not be eligible for retiree health benefits. This has been an important tool in recruiting and retaining educators. We should reinstate this. And then finally, I mentioned earlier, provide principals with the support personnel they need. We have huge gaps in mental health and physical health support in our schools.
Number 9 is thoughtfully and strategically invest in school safety. So we just talked about Butler High School. We know that school safety is on the top of most of our minds as school shootings have become a common occurrence, and bullying remains a big problem for our young people. If students don't feel safe in their schools, they can't learn. So this needs to be at the top of our priority list at the national, state, and local levels. School shootings have often been followed by calls to install metal detectors, increase police presence, and even armed teachers who, like in this cartoon, really need to be armed with more resources rather than guns. Evidence shows, however, that hardening schools can create climates where students feel more afraid, less supported, and less able to learn. Instead, we should understand that school safety comes from having a positive school climate that encourages social emotional learning and healthy relationships. One of the best ways to address this, and I'm building on what Keith said, is to invest in school support staff to serve students' mental health needs. North Carolina is sorely lacking in this. For example, the recommended ratio for school psychologists by the National Association for School Psychologists is 1 to every 700 students. In North Carolina, the ratio is 1 to 2,100. 1 in 700 compared with 1 in 2,100. There are 13 school districts in this state that do not have a single psychologist on their payroll. So here are our recommendations. First, dramatically increase funding for and access to school-based mental health supports. Our leaders should create a multi-year plan to address the deficit of school social workers, nurses, psychologists, and counselors. Second, provide resources for school security infrastructure updates. Our schools have substantial need when it comes to infrastructure, and we really think that this falls under the broader umbrella of school safety. We hope that the new school bond bill that we mentioned coming up in 2019 will help us to begin to address this. Third, reject any effort to arm teachers or utilize armed volunteers on campus. Unfortunately, it needs to be said. Luckily, this has not had much traction in North Carolina yet, but we should continue to reject any calls to arm teachers. Fourth, be thoughtful about directing funds to hardening schools, which show little to no positive impact and could end up worsening discipline disparities and making students feel less safe rather than more safe. And finally, the elephant in the room, we're going to talk about it. We need to have a real conversation about gun access. We can't fix the problem if we don't talk about it, and this is one that we can no longer afford to ignore. School shootings are happening far too often, and we need to all have an honest conversation about what we need to do to reduce children's access to guns.
Issue number 10, focus on whole child, whole day. Last but certainly not least, as this cartoon illustrates, our children bring a lot more into school each day than books and backpacks. It says homelessness, hunger, sickness. Now in this section, we're actually highlighting 3 different areas. The first is the impact of trauma or adverse childhood experiences. Some of you know that the Public School Forum has been leading the way on this issue in our schools with our North Carolina Resilience and Learning Project. Second is the need for more out-of-school time and after-school programming. I know we've got some after-school program folks here in the room. There is a $9 return on every $1 invested in after-school programs, and Summer programs, get this, this is wild, can actually add more than 1,000 hours, 1,080 hours of academic enrichment in a child's year, which is equivalent to the number of hours in 144 school days. And then finally, third is early childhood education. Just in the last week, our leaders from SAS and from PNC, Medical Mutual, and others highlighted the continually growing evidence, much of it coming out of Dr. Ken Dodge's group over at Duke University, are proving that how we do pre-K in North Carolina works, and its benefits last much longer than previously thought. So looking ahead, to echo our school safety recommendation, we should create a multi-year plan to address the severe deficit of school social workers, nurses, psychologists, and counselors. Invest in training for trauma-sensitive schools and classrooms. Students who come to school hungry or living in poverty or have experienced traumatic events are not in a productive state to learn. We've learned so much in recent years about what you can do to make schools more trauma-informed and support our teachers and our students. Expand access to after-school programs, especially in rural communities for low-income youth. The state can provide resources and support for the development and sustainability of out-of-school programs. Our Center for After-School Programs at the Forum, the number one question we get from programs is about how do we find money? You know, how do we keep going? Low-income youth experience 6,000 fewer hours of enrichment and academic learning than their more affluent peers by the 8th grade because of lack of access to out-of-school time. And then finally, expand access to early childhood education through universal pre-K. Education for all children must start before kindergarten, and the North Carolina General Assembly has recognized this need with increased investments for North Carolina that have opened up more spots for children wanting to enroll. But instead of just reducing the wait list, let's eliminate it entirely, and let's make sure that every family and every child that needs to have pre-K has access to it. So that's our top 10 for 2019. Thank you, Lauren, for joining me up here. We look forward to working with each and every one of you. We know you wouldn't be here if you didn't care about education and about children and about these things.